So imagine for a second, right, that you're sitting down to write this really cheerful holiday update to your family.
Oh, like the classic end-of-year newsletter everyone sends out.
Exactly. You've got your coffee, you're in a
Yeah.
great mood, and you're typing out, hey, everyone, the kids are doing great. We just adopted a new dog. Work is going well.
Sounds perfectly peaceful.
Right. And then right in the middle of typing that warm, pleasant greeting, you hear the sound of shattering glass.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Yeah, you realize someone has literally just broken into your house. In a split second, that nice letter you were writing is totally abandoned, and you are furiously texting a frantic 911 alert to your neighborhood watch.
That is a massive shift.
It is. You go from a posture of complete peace to a posture of absolute adrenaline-fueled warfare in, like, the blink of an eye.
And that abrupt, almost violent shift in tone is one of the most jarring things a reader can experience. But it captures the exact psychological pivot that launches the text we are looking at today.
Which is exactly why we're talking about it. Welcome to today's deep dive, everyone. If you're listening to this, you likely have an interest in how ancient texts survive, how they function, and what kind of crises forged them.
And today we have a really fascinating one.
We do. We are looking at a massive, incredibly detailed scholarly survey by Chris R. Velasquez. And his subject is one of the shortest, yet most notoriously mysterious books in the New Testament. I'm talking about the book of Jude.
It really is a remarkable piece of literature. Just to give you some physical context, if you were to open a Bible, Jude is a single-chapter letter tucked right at the very back.
Like literally the last thing you read before hitting the book of Revelation.
Right, exactly. And even though it is incredibly brief, we're talking just 25 verses long here.
Which is nothing.
It's nothing. But it carries an astonishing amount of weight. It is packed to the brim with this wild apocalyptic imagery.
Yeah, like it references wandering stars, waterless clouds, ancient rebellious angels from before the flood.
Yeah, and even a bizarre dispute over the physical body of Moses.
Which we are absolutely going to get into because that is wild. But just 25 verses. Think about that. People write longer social media captions today,
Oh, for sure.
So my immediate question, and basically our mission for this deep dive, is to figure out how a text so short can possibly contain so much theological firepower.
And historical controversy, too.
Exactly. We want to unpack this dense letter, understand the severe real-world crisis that caused the author to hit the panic button, and explore how he uses ancient, even non-biblical Jewish traditions to make his point.
Because beneath all that apocalyptic language, Jude is delivering a really urgent warning. It's about grace, authority, and accountability.
And honestly, it feels uncomfortably relevant to the world we live in right now.
It really does. And that relevance is what makes Velasquez's survey so compelling. He establishes very early on that Jude is, fundamentally, a crisis letter.
Right. It's not just casual theology.
No, it's an emergency intervention written to a specific community in the late 1st century. And the key to unlocking this text, like the way we move past just being confused by all the weird imagery, is to understand the historical and literary context.
The late Second Temple Jewish Christian worldview, right?
Yes. If we try to read this as a calm, detached theological textbook, we are going to completely miss the absolute fire of its rhetoric.
The fire of it. I love that framing. Because before we can decode the heavy imagery, before we get to the angels and the wandering stars, we really have to figure out who is actually speaking to us.
Authorship is always the first hurdle.
Right. And the author introduces himself right at the beginning, but it raises some immediate questions. Let's look at the first verse. He calls himself a servant of Jesus Christ and brother of James.
Which is a very specific introduction.
Yeah. Now, the survey points out that in traditional evangelical scholarship, this is identified as Jude, or Judas, who was the brother of both James and Jesus.
That is the traditional understanding, yes. The name in Greek is Judas, but English translations traditionally use Jude to distinguish him from Judas Iscariot.
Right, for obvious reasons.
Very obvious reasons. But the source material notes that if we follow this traditional view, we're looking at a text written by a man who grew up in the exact same household as Jesus of Nazareth.
Which makes his introduction wild to me. Like, if I am writing an emergency letter to a community and I need them to listen to my authority immediately because the house is being broken into, I am putting my strongest credentials right at the top.
You'd lead with the biggest flex you have.
Exactly. Why on earth wouldn't he say, hey, it's Jude, literal brother of Jesus? Why just call himself a servant and then lean on his relationship to James?
It seems so counterintuitive to our modern sensibilities, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Today, name-dropping is the ultimate power play.
Oh, 100%.
But you have to consider the cultural background of the first-century Mediterranean world. This was fundamentally an honor-shame society.
Okay, unpack that a bit.
Well, in that specific cultural paradigm, spiritual authority wasn't gained by self-exaltation or boasting about your bloodline, especially when you remember that the central figure of your movement, Jesus, was crucified as a state criminal.
Right, and Jesus explicitly taught that the greatest among you must be a servant.
Exactly. So flexing his blood relation to Jesus might have actually undermined his spiritual authority.
Wait, really? It would have hurt his credibility?
It very well could have been seen as a crass, fleshly claim to power. Instead, he appeals to a recognized communal authority within the Jesus movement. He identifies first as a servant, which establishes his theological submission.
Got it. And then he mentions his kinship with James.
Right, and James was a towering figure. James was the recognized leader of the church in Jerusalem, which was essentially the central hub of early Christianity.
So by linking himself to James, Jude is seeking social legitimation through humility and established community ties.
Yes, rather than throwing his personal weight around. Authority here is grounded in service.
Okay, that makes a lot of sense. But the survey also mentions that this traditional view of authorship isn't the only one out there, right? There's a debate.
Oh, there's a very complex debate. While traditionalists place the letter roughly between AD 60 and 90, authored by the historical Jude, many critical scholars argue the text is pseudonymous.
Pseudonymous, meaning someone writing under a pen name, like a later writer adopting Jude's identity.
Yes, exactly. And the arguments for pseudonymity don't just stem from arbitrary skepticism. They are based on textual clues within the letter itself.
Like what?
For one, the Greek in this letter is highly polished. It's incredibly forceful, compact, and it utilizes sophisticated rhetorical devices.
So they're saying a regular guy couldn't have written it.
Some historians question whether a Galilean tradesman from the first century would have possessed that level of formal, elite Greek education.
That's a fair question.
Additionally, the letter shares a significant amount of literary material with the second epistle of Peter. I mean, they are so similar in certain passages that scholars endlessly debate who is copying from whom.
Oh, interesting. So it's a chicken and egg situation.
Exactly, and the argument goes, if Jude copied from 2 Peter, and 2 Peter is generally considered a later text, then Jude must be even later.
So if it's pseudonymous, does that mean it's a forgery? Because that word always carries such a deceptive, malicious connotation today.
It's really important to differentiate ancient pseudonymity from modern forgery. In the ancient world, writing in the name of a revered figure was often a recognized literary convention.
So it wasn't a scam.
Not necessarily. It was often a way of saying, this is what the tradition of Jude would say to our current crisis. But here's the crucial thing the survey makes clear. Whether you take the traditional view or the pseudonymous view, the historical setting of the letter remains identical.
Right. There is still a specific community in severe real-time distress.
Exactly. The crisis is real either way.
And that brings us right back to that opening analogy, the pivot. In verses 3 and 4, we see the author's original plan get completely derailed.
The text shows it so clearly.
Yeah, the English translation says he was very eager to write to you about our common salvation, but then he found it necessary to write appealing to you to contend for the faith.
And the underlying Greek vocabulary there is incredibly intense. When he says he found it necessary to write, the word implies a compelling, almost physical distress.
Wow.
And the phrase contend for the faith uses the Greek word epigenesistai.
Epigenestai, that sounds a lot like agony.
It actually shares that exact root. It's athletic or military language.
Right.
It means to struggle earnestly, to fight over something, to literally agonize in a defense.
He is telling them they are in a fight for their community's life.
Precisely.
And what exactly are they fighting for? He says they are fighting for the faith that was once for all delivered to the saints. What does once for all actually mean in this context?
Well, to a modern ear, it might sound a bit close-minded.
Right, like he's just saying, we have all the answers, stop asking questions.
But what the source points out is that the term used here, which is hapax, in Greek, signals finality and sufficiency. It means the core message of the gospel has already been entrusted to the community.
They're defending what scholars call the apostolic deposit, right?
Yes. The teachings handed down by the original apostles, the crisis they are facing cannot be solved by waiting around for a brand new revelation.
So they don't need to invent a new creed.
Exactly. They need to fiercely protect the one they were already given. The foundation is already laid. The threat is someone trying to dynamite that foundation.
Which brings up the obvious question. If you are listening and you hear this kind of military defensive language, your mind naturally goes to external enemy.
Especially in the first century.
Right. I think of the Roman Empire. I think of Nero, lions in the Colosseum, state-sponsored persecution. But that's not what is happening here at all, is it?
Not even slightly. There is no mention of the Roman government anywhere in this letter. There are no local governors or imperial edicts causing this panic.
So where is the attack coming from?
The threat is entirely internal. It is an inside job.
The text says it's because certain people have secretly slipped in among you. How does someone secretly slip into an ancient house church? It's not like a mega church today where you can just hide in the back row with a cup of coffee.
Right. These were very tight-knit, intimate communities.
Yeah.
But the Greek word parizodison is fascinating here.
Hmm.
It implies stealth, yes, but more specifically, it implies coming in sideways.
Coming inside, like slipping in under the radar.
Yes. It doesn't necessarily mean they snuck through a window in the dead of night like a burglar. It means they integrated themselves into the community under false pretenses.
Ah, so they probably used the right vocabulary.
They participated in the rituals, they said all the right things, they gained trust, and once they were securely inside, they began to introduce a lethal corruption.
Let's talk about that corruption, because we need to know what the actual crime is here. What is the core error that has Jude so worked up that he drops his pleasant letter and starts screaming, "Red alert"?
The survey distills their error into a dual diagnosis. First, they pervert the grace of God into licentiousness. And second, they deny Jesus Christ as the only sovereign and Lord.
Okay, we need to unpack both of those because they sound very theological, but I suspect they have massive practical implications. Let's start with perverting grace into licentiousness. Licentiousness basically means moral lack of restraint, right? Like doing whatever you want.
Essentially, yes. It means taking the concept of freedom and stripping it of all moral boundaries.
Okay.
In the early Christian message, grace was this radical idea that God freely forgives sin, not based on your perfect performance, but based on Christ.
Right, a beautiful, freeing concept.
But these intruders have taken that beautiful concept and weaponized it. They are arguing that if God's grace covers all sin, then the physical body and its actions literally do not matter.
So they're saying, hey, we're forgiven, so let's party.
Pretty much. You can indulge in whatever appetites you want, be it sexual immorality, greed, gluttony, because grace will just automatically cover it. It's a theological distortion that provides a blank check for behavioral corruption.
It's like finding a loophole in a contract and exploiting it until the whole system collapses.
That's a great way to put it.
And that connects perfectly to the second part of their error, doesn't it? Denying Jesus as sovereign and Lord.
They are deeply intertwined. The Greek word Jude uses for what they reject is kyriotouta, which translates to lordship or absolute authority.
Okay.
You see, you cannot have the biblical concept of grace without the biblical concept of lordship. But these intruders are fundamentally anti-authoritarian.
Which is what Sostebasius, or ungodly, points to, right?
Exactly. They want the forgiveness and the safety of the community, but they refuse any authority that dictates how they should actually live their daily lives. They reject the ethical demands of following a master.
And Jude does not hold back in how he describes these people. The insults, well, they're metaphors, but the metaphors he uses are just blistering.
He is incredibly poetic in his anger.
Yeah. He calls them blemishes at your love feasts. Now we should clarify. A love feast, the agape feast, that was a central part of early church life, right? It wasn't just a quick cracker and a sip of juice like modern communion.
No, not at all. The agape feast was a full communal meal, often leading directly into the Eucharist or communion. And you really have to understand the socioeconomic dynamics of the first century to see why this matters so much.
Right, because society back then was highly stratified.
Incredibly stratified. The rich and the poor simply did not eat together. Masters did not dine with slaves. But in the Christian love feast, a wealthy householder would host, and slaves, day laborers, and the wealthy elite would all share the exact same food at the same table.
It was a radical display of unity and equality.
It was revolutionary.
And Jude says these intruders are blemishes on that beautiful thing. Now, I've also seen translations that render that word as hidden reefs.
Yes, both translations capture the extreme danger. If they are hidden reefs, it means they are unseen hazards lying just below the surface of the water, just waiting to rip the bottom out of a ship.
So they are attending these beautiful meals of unity, but their underlying greed and immorality are threatening to wreck the entire community.
Precisely. They are a shipwreck waiting to happen.
He goes on to call them shepherds feeding themselves. He calls them waterless clouds swept along by winds, fruitless trees in late autumn, twice dead, uprooted, wild waves of the sea casting up the foam of their own shame.
The imagery is just overwhelming.
And my personal favorite, wandering stars for whom the gloom of utter darkness has been reserved forever. I mean, the poetry is incredible, but let me press on this a bit.
Sure.
Take waterless clouds. That conjures up an image of farmers in a severe drought, looking up, seeing a dark cloud, getting their hopes up, and then the cloud just blows right past without dropping a single drop of rain. It's totally deceptive.
Right. All promise, no payoff.
But why attack them so personally? Why not just write a logical, calm thesis, refuting their theology point by point?
Because for Jude, theology cannot be divorced from morality. The source emphasizes that Jude views false teaching as having a distinct moral shape.
Meaning it's not just a head issue, it's a heart and hands issue.
Exactly. This is not a polite academic disagreement between two scholars sitting in a library. When Jude calls them shepherds feeding themselves, he is invoking a very specific, devastating critique of leadership.
What kind of critique?
It's a critique of what sociologists call patronage-like leadership abuse.
Okay, what does that mean in the Roman context?
In the Roman patronage system, a wealthy patron provided for clients financially or socially. But in return, the clients owed the patron total loyalty and social capital.
So it's very transactional.
Highly transactional.
Yeah.
These intruders are acting like corrupt patrons or corrupt shepherds. They are using their spiritual position, their charisma, and their smooth rhetoric about grace to mask private greed.
So they are exploiting the trust of the community for their own gain.
Yes. When you have leaders who demand grace for themselves but absolutely refuse the lordship of Christ, meaning they refuse accountability, they inevitably end up consuming the very people they're supposed to be serving.
If you're listening right now, just pause and think about how incredibly modern that sounds.
It's chillingly modern.
How often do we see this exact dynamic play out today? Charismatic leaders, whether it's in a church, a political movement, a tech startup, or like the wellness industry, who use all the right enlightened vocabulary.
Right. They know all the buzzwords.
They promise freedom, they promise a totally new way of thinking, but behind closed doors, they are completely unmoored from any ethical authority. They use their platform to feed their egos and their bank accounts, and when the whole thing eventually collapses, it's the followers who get hurt.
That is precisely the danger Jude is addressing. Look at the wandering stars metaphor.
Yeah, let's unpack that one.
In the ancient world, sailors navigated by the stars because the stars were fixed. They were reliable. A wandering star, like a planet or a comet that breaks from the expected celestial pattern, is totally useless for navigation.
Because if you follow it, you're going to get lost.
Worse than lost. If a sailor tries to steer his ship by a wandering star, he will end up crashing into the rocks. Jude is warning the church, if you navigate your spiritual life by these leaders who have broken free from the authority of Christ, you will be destroyed.
That is a terrifying and vivid image. So Jude has identified the threat. He has exposed their character and their hidden motives. But he knows that just calling them names, even poetic ones, isn't enough.
No, he has to prove his case.
He has to prove that their path leads to destruction. He has to show the community that God takes this seriously. And to do that, he reaches into the past, he pulls out the historical receipts.
Yes. The survey transitions here into Jude's use of historical precedents. Jude knows his audience is deeply steeped in Jewish scripture and the interpretive traditions of the Second Temple period.
So he speaks their historical language.
Exactly. He builds an inescapable logical trap using history. He uses a literary device of groupings of three, called triads, to show a consistent pattern of divine justice.
Let's walk through these triads because they are heavy. The first triad of judgment, which is in verses 5 through 7, covers three massive historical events.
Right.
First, the Exodus generation. Second, the rebellious angels. And third, Sodom and Gomorrah. Let's start the Exodus. Jude reminds them that a people were saved out of the land of Egypt, but afterward, those who did not believe were destroyed.
Yes.
Wait a minute. Why use the Israelites? Weren't they the heroes of the Old Testament? They're the ones who were oppressed, who experienced the 10 plagues, who literally walked through the Red Sea on dry land. Why is Jude bringing them up as an example of judgment?
This is one of the most crucial theological points in the entire letter. You really have to understand the covenantal logic Jude is operating under.
Okay, lay on me.
For Jude, prior deliverance does not guarantee future immunity. In fact, prior deliverance heightens your accountability.
Let me make sure I'm grasping this. You are saying that because they experienced the miracle of the Red Sea, God actually expected more of them, not less.
Yes, absolutely. Think about this story from the book of Numbers. God delivered Israel from slavery. He brought them all the way to the edge of the promised land.
And they sent the spies in?
Right. But when they got there, they refused to trust him. They believed the bad report of the spies, they rebelled against Moses' leadership, and they actually wanted to go back to Egypt to be slaves again.
Wow, yeah.
Because of that unbelief, that entire generation was judged and forced to wander in the wilderness until they died. Jude is pointing this out to the first century church to say, do not think that just because you've been baptized, just because you are part of the covenant community, you are completely safe.
Privilege without present faithfulness leads to disaster.
That is the exact message.
That is a very sobering warning. He is basically looking at the intruders and the people tempted to follow them and saying, you think you're safe because you show up to the love feasts. The Israelites thought they were safe because they walked through the Red Sea.
And there's a fascinating textual variant in verse 5 that makes this even more intense, isn't there?
Yes, let's talk about that. Because when Jude talks about who saved Israel out of Egypt, some ancient manuscripts use the word Lord, obviously referring to Yahweh.
Right, which is standard.
But a significant number of very ancient manuscripts actually use the word Jesus. They say that Jesus saved a people out of Egypt and afterward destroyed those who did not believe.
Which would mean Jude is retroactively placing Jesus right in the middle of the Old Testament Exodus story.
Yes. The survey highlights this as a staggeringly strong Christological claim. If the Jesus reading is original, Jude is identifying the pre-incarnate Son of God as the active agent of both salvation and judgment in Israel's history. How does that play against the intruders?
Oh, it completely demolishes their position. Remember, their core error is that they casually deny Jesus as sovereign and Lord.
Right.
And Jude is essentially saying, the Jesus whose authority you're casually dismissing, he is the exact same divine figure who crushed the Egyptian empire, parted the sea, and then struck down the rebellious Israelites in the desert. You are picking a fight with the judge of history.
Wow. Okay, so that's the first example. The second example in the triad is the angels. Jude writes about angels, quote, who did not stay within their own position of authority but left their proper dwelling. And he says they are now kept in eternal chains in gloomy darkness until the judgment. I assume this isn't just a generic reference to Satan falling from heaven.
No, this is highly specific. Jude is drawing on a tradition rooted in Genesis chapter 6, which was vastly expanded upon in later Jewish literature, specifically the Book of Enoch.
Okay, the Book of Enoch.
The tradition speaks of the Watchers. These were heavenly beings who abandoned their appointed celestial spheres, came down to earth, and engaged in illicit sexual relations with human women, producing these monstrous offspring.
So the theme here is stepping out of bounds, leaving the domain God specifically assigned to you.
Precisely. It's a rebellion against the divine order of creation, and that perfectly sets up the third example, the cities of Sodom and Gomorrah.
Right. Jude says they indulged in sexual immorality and pursued unnatural desire, and serve as an example by undergoing a punishment of eternal fire.
So if we look at this triad as a whole, the Exodus, the angels, and Sodom, what is the thread connecting all of them?
The thread is rebellion against divine boundaries.
Exactly. The Israelites rebelled against God's plan for the Promised Land. The angels rebelled against the boundaries between heaven and earth. Sodom rebelled against the boundaries of natural human relations.
In every single case, beings who were given a specific sphere of existence decided they knew better than God.
They crossed the line and faced catastrophic judgment. Jude is mapping this exact pattern onto the intruders in the house church.
And he doesn't stop with broad groups either. He zooms in. He gives us a second triad, this time focusing on three specific, notorious individuals from the Old Testament. Verse 11 says, woe to them, for they walked in the way of Cain and abandoned themselves for the sake of gain to Balaam's error and perished in Korah's rebellion.
It's a very pointed list.
Let's break these down because, again, he is assuming his audience knows exactly who these guys are and what they represent. Start with Cain. We all know Cain killed his brother Abel, but how does that apply to false teachers in a church?
Well, in the Jewish interpretive tradition that Jude is tapping into, Cain wasn't just a murderer. He was the archetype of corrupt, self-willed religion.
Self-willed religion.
Yeah. According to the tradition, Cain offered a sacrifice to God on his own terms, completely ignoring what God actually required. When God rejected it, Cain's response wasn't repentance. It was envy and violence. He represents the person who wants the benefits of religion, but refuses the obedience and ends up destroying those around him out of jealousy.
So, inventing your own spirituality and getting violently angry when it doesn't work out. Then we have Balaam. He is one of the strangest figures in the Old Testament. The prophet with the talking donkey. What is Balaam's error?
Balaam is the ultimate archetype of the religious mercenary. The story in the book of Numbers is that a foreign king hired Balaam to put a spiritual curse on the Israelites.
Right, for money.
God prevented Balaam from cursing them directly, but Balaam figured out a workaround. Because he really wanted the king's money and status, he advised the king to send women into the Israelite camp to seduce the men into idolatry and sexual immorality.
Which would cause God to judge his own people.
Yes. So he weaponized their own weaknesses against them, just to get a paycheck. He is the original shepherd feeding himself. He compromised the community's integrity for personal financial gain.
And Jude is saying the intruders in the church are doing the exact same thing. They are leading people into sexual and moral compromise because it builds their own influence and fills their own pockets.
Exactly.
And then the final figure, Korah. What was his rebellion?
Korah's story is the climax of this anti-authoritarian theme. In Numbers chapter 16, Korah leads a massive mutiny against Moses and Aaron.
And his argument sounded pretty good on the surface, didn't it?
It sounded very egalitarian. He basically said, the whole congregation is holy. We all hear from God. Why do you, Moses, set yourself above the assembly?
But what was his real motive?
His real motivation was a desire to seize power for himself. He rejected the leaders God had explicitly appointed.
And the result of that mutiny?
The ground literally split open and swallowed Korah and his followers alive. It is one of the most terrifying judgments in the Hebrew Bible.
Wow.
By citing Korah, Jude is telling the church that these intruders who mock the apostles' authority are standing on ground that is literally about to give way.
The progression there is incredible. He moves from Cain's selfish religion to Balaam's greedy manipulation to Korah's outright mutiny against authority. It's a psychological profile of apostasy.
It really is.
But here is where we have to address something that is bound to trip up a lot of readers. You mentioned the book of Enoch earlier when we talked about the angels. And in verses 14 and 15, Jude does something that seems very problematic. He explicitly quotes from Enoch as if it's prophecy.
He does. He writes, "It was also about these that Enoch, the seventh from Adam, prophesied, saying, Behold, the Lord comes with 10,000s of his holy ones to execute judgment on all." The survey confirms that this is a direct, undeniable quotation from 1 Enoch 1.9.
And just to make it even weirder, back in verse 9, Jude talks about a dispute between Michael the archangel and the devil. He says they were contending over the body of Moses. I have read the Old Testament. That story is nowhere in there. Where does he get that?
The scholarly consensus is that Jude is drawing from another extra-biblical Jewish tradition, likely a lost text known as the Assumption of Moses.
The Assumption of Moses.
Yeah. Yes. We only have fragments of that text today, but it was apparently very well known in the first century.
Okay, I have to play devil's advocate here. If you grew up in a tradition that holds a very strict view of the biblical canon, the idea that the 66 books of the Bible are the only inspired words of God, this is a massive stumbling block.
I can absolutely see why it would be.
How can an inspired New Testament author quote from a book like 1 Enoch to prove a theological point? Doesn't quoting it mean that 1 Enoch should be considered inspired scripture? Like, should we be binding it in leather and preaching from it on Sundays?
That is a highly perceptive question, and you are not the first person to ask it. In fact, some early church fathers, like Jerome, noted that Jude was viewed with suspicion by some early Christians precisely because it quoted from non-canonical texts.
Oh, really?
Yes. But the survey provides a vital framework for understanding this. Quoting a true statement from a text does not canonicalize the entire text.
Help me understand the mechanics of that. Give me a comparison.
Well, think about the Apostle Paul. When Paul was preaching in Athens, in Acts 17, he quoted the pagan Greek poets Aratus and Epimenides to make a point about humanity's relationship to God.
Right.
Later, in his letter to Titus, he quotes Epimenides again. Paul was not saying that those pagan philosophers were divinely inspired prophets whose entire body of work was flawless scripture. He was simply acknowledging, hey, your own poets recognize this specific truth, and I am going to use it to make my point.
Oh, I see. So it's like a modern pastor quoting a line from a Shakespeare play or a profound lyric from a secular song to illustrate a sermon point.
Exactly.
The pastor isn't saying Shakespeare is the Bible. They're just saying Shakespeare hit the nail on the head regarding human nature in that one specific line.
That's a helpful way to picture it, but let's add the historical weight to it. Jude isn't just quoting a random play. He is quoting literature that was deeply revered by his specific audience.
Okay, how deeply revered?
The survey discusses the archaeological context here. Fragments of the Book of Enoch, written in Aramaic, were discovered among the Dead Sea Scrolls at Qumran.
Which tells us, what about the timeline?
It proves that these Enochic traditions heavily predate the Jesus movement. They date back to the 3rd and 2nd centuries BC.
Wow.
Jude's audience, likely Jewish Christians, would have been intimately familiar with 1 Enoch. To them, it wasn't some fringe, weird text. It was culturally significant literature that captured the apocalyptic mood of the era.
So Jude is meeting his audience where they are.
Yes, he is using their cultural language, the language of cosmic judgment and angelic battles, to communicate the absolute urgency of the moment.
And there is archaeological evidence that the early church accepted Jude's letter, despite these quotes, right? The source mentions something called Papyrus 72.
Yes, P72. It is an incredibly important manuscript found in Egypt, dating to the 3rd or 4th century AD. It contains the earliest surviving copies of one intact Peter and Jude.
So it's old.
It's very old. The existence of P72 shows us that the early Christian communities valued, copied, and circulated Jude's letter widely. They understood what he was doing with these ancient traditions, and they didn't find it disqualifying.
Let's go back to that bizarre story about the archangel Michael and the devil arguing over Moses' body. Even if we accept that Jude is quoting a cultural tradition, why use that specific story?
It's all about the contrast.
What point is he trying to make by bringing up an angelic wrestling match over a corpse?
It is entirely about the contrast in behavior. Look at the context. Jude has just finished saying that the intruders in the church reject authority and blaspheme the glorious ones.
Right.
They are arrogant. They mock spiritual realities they don't even comprehend. So Jude brings up the story of Michael to show them what true holy behavior looks like.
How so?
In the tradition, Michael is the archangel. He is arguably the most powerful created being in heaven. But when Michael is disputing with the devil over Moses' body, he does not presume to pronounce a blasphemous judgment.
He doesn't insult the devil.
He doesn't puff out his chest and rely on his own angelic authority to win the argument. Instead, he shows reverent restraint. He simply defers to God, saying, "The Lord rebuke you."
Oh, wow. So Jude is holding up a mirror to the false teachers.
Exactly.
He is saying, even the highest-ranking angel in heaven knows his place and submits to God's authority, and yet you mortals think you can just march in here, mock the apostles, rewrite the rules of grace, and do whatever you want.
It exposes the absolute absurdity of their arrogance. They have less respect for divine order than the Archangel Michael.
So let's pause and take stock of where we are. We have a church that has been infiltrated by manipulative leaders who are exploiting the community for sex and money.
Right.
Jude has exposed their motives. He has compared them to the worst rebels in Israel's history. He has quoted terrifying prophecies of cosmic judgment.
The stakes are incredibly high.
If I am a first-century Christian sitting in a crowded, dimly lit room, listening to this letter being read out loud, I am terrified. I am looking around the room wondering who is a hidden reef. I am wondering if the ground is about to swallow us up. How does the community survive this level of internal threat without just collapsing into paranoia and despair?
That is the pivotal question, and Jude knows he has to answer it. He doesn't just want to scare them. He wants to secure them.
How does he do that?
He does this by introducing a profound theological framework regarding the mechanics of salvation. The survey calls this the theology of preservation and perseverance.
Preservation and perseverance. Let's break that down. How does Jude comfort a terrified church?
He starts by reminding them of their foundation. Look back at the very first verse of the letter. Before he mentions the crisis, before he mentions the false teachers, Jude addresses his audience as those who are called, beloved in God the Father, and kept for Jesus Christ.
Kept. That's a really strong word.
The Greek word is eschuris. It means to guard, to hold firmly, to preserve. Jude establishes right out of the gate that the believer's ultimate security relies on divine preservation.
So God is the one doing the keeping.
Yes, the survival of the church does not rest on their own fragile strength. It rests on God's sovereign grip.
Okay, that is incredibly comforting. If God is keeping me, then the wandering stars can't snatch me away. But if that's true, it raises a massive logical problem later in the letter.
How so?
Because when we get down to verses 20 and 21, Jude pivots and starts issuing commands. He says, "But you, beloved, building yourselves up in your most holy faith and praying in the Holy Spirit, keep yourselves in the love of God."
Ah.
Wait a second. Keep yourselves. If God is already keeping me, why do I have to keep myself? It sounds like putting your car on autopilot but still white-knuckling the steering wheel. Who is actually driving?
That is the classic theological paradox of divine sovereignty and human responsibility. And the survey frames this beautifully. It describes these two concepts not as contradictions, but as covenantally coordinated realities.
Covenantally coordinated realities. That is a thick academic phrase. We need to unpack that. How do those two things coordinate in real time?
It means that divine action and human action work together in a specific sequence. Divine preservation always precedes and enables human perseverance.
Okay.
God's keeping power is the bedrock foundation. If God isn't guarding you, you have no chance against the deceptions of the world. But, and this is crucial, God's keeping power does not turn you into a passive robot.
So grace is not an excuse for passivity.
Precisely. It does not mean you can just sit back, relax, and let the false teachers destroy your church while you wait to be beamed up to heaven. Discipleship requires active, grueling spiritual formation.
You are commanded to contend.
You are commanded to build yourself up in the truth.
Yeah.
You are commanded to keep yourself in God's love. But notice how Jude says to do it. Praying in the Holy Spirit. You aren't relying on autonomous, pull yourself up by your bootstraps willpower. You are relying on the Spirit of God to empower the very effort that God requires of you.
I think I see it now. It's like a parent holding the hand of a toddler as they walk near a busy street. The parent's grip is the absolute security. The parent is keeping the child safe.
That's a fantastic analogy.
But the child is still required to walk, to put one foot in front of the other, to keep themselves moving forward alongside the parent.
Exactly. The child's effort is real and necessary, but the parent's grip is the ultimate guarantee. Jude is telling the church, God has a hold of you. Now, get to work. Start building yourselves up in the truth.
And that communal effort leads directly into the next phase of his instructions, doesn't it?
It does.
Because if you are actively keeping yourself in God's love, you have to figure out what to do with the people sitting next to you who are struggling. We have established that the intruders are dangerous. But a church isn't just made up of evil wolves and perfect sheep.
There's a messy middle.
There's a very messy middle. There are innocent people who are getting confused. There are people who are starting to slip. How do you handle them? Do you just kick everyone out who asks a question?
No, and this is where Jude shows incredible pastoral brilliance. The survey outlines a section on pastoral triage.
Triage, like in a hospital.
Exactly. In verses 22 and 23, Jude provides a highly specific, differentiated instruction manual for handling spiritual casualties. It is not a one-size-fits-all approach. He gives 3 distinct categories of care.
Let me read the text for these categories. It says, "And have mercy on those who doubt. Save others by snatching them out of the fire. To others show mercy with fear, hating even the garment stained by the flesh."
It's very specific.
I want to linger on the idea of triage here.
Look.
If you've ever been to an emergency room, you know how triage works. If you walk in with a sprained ankle and another guy is wheeled in having a massive heart attack, the nurses don't treat you both with the same urgency or the same methods. They differentiate based on the severity of the crisis.
Yes. Jude is doing that spiritually. Let's look at the first group. Have mercy on those who doubt.
Who are they?
These are the members of the community who have listened to the false teachers and are starting to get confused. They are asking questions. They are wavering. Jude's command here is incredibly gentle. He doesn't say, excommunicate the doubters. He says, have mercy on them.
In other words, don't punish someone for being confused. Answer their questions. Be patient. Give them a bandage, not an amputation.
Exactly. But the second group requires a completely different approach. Save others by snatching them out of the fire.
Well, that sounds intense.
These are people who have moved beyond mere doubt. They are actively starting to participate in the moral corruption of the intruders. They're literally stepping into the flames.
So you can't just sit back and have a polite philosophical debate with them over coffee.
No. If someone's house is on fire, you don't send them a memo. You kick the door down and drag them out.
No.
Jude is calling for aggressive, urgent, direct intervention. You confront them. You warn them of the destruction they are bringing on themselves. You snatch them back to safety.
And then we get to the third group. And this one is fascinating and slightly terrifying. To others show mercy with fear, hating even the garments stained by the flesh. How do you show mercy and fear at the same time? It sounds like a contradiction.
It is a profound psychological insight into the reality of sin. Jude is warning the church that compassion without boundaries is deadly.
So these people are really far gone.
This third group represents people who are deeply, deeply entrenched in the corrupt lifestyle of the intruders. They are entirely compromised. Jude says, yes, you still must show them mercy. You don't write them off entirely, but you must do it with a holy terror of the sin that has enslaved them.
What does the stained garment metaphor actually mean in the first century context?
It likely refers to undergarments soiled by bodily discharges, which, in the Jewish purity laws, would render a person ritually unclean. It is a visceral, graphic image of contamination. Jude is saying, when you reach down into the mud to pull someone out of this level of corruption, you have to be extraordinarily careful that you don't get pulled into the mud with them. You have to hate the contamination even while you are trying to save the person.
It reminds me of a lifeguard dealing with a drowning victim. If someone is drowning and panicking, they will reflexively grab onto the lifeguard and pull them both underwater.
That's a great comparison.
A trained lifeguard knows how to approach the victim, how to secure them, and how to maintain enough distance so they don't both drown. Jude is saying, be a lifeguard, but respect the danger of the water.
That is exactly the dynamic. It is a call for strict boundaries. You maintain your theological and moral integrity while you exercise love. It requires massive spiritual maturity.
So bringing all of this together, we've talked about a first century house church, we've talked about ancient patronage systems, Enoch, and the Archangel Michael. It's an incredible historical tour.
It covers so much ground.
But as we start to land the plane on this deep dive, how does this ancient crisis letter translate to the modern world? Does the survey offer any thoughts on its contemporary relevance?
It does, and the connections are stark. Think about the dominant cultural narratives of our time. Jude offers a direct challenge to modern cultures that equate freedom with absolute self-assertion.
That sounds familiar.
We live in an era where the highest cultural good is often defined as the ability to do whatever you want with whomever you want, without any external authority judging you.
Which is exactly the sales pitch the intruders were making in the first century. Grace means no rules.
The human heart really hasn't changed, but Jude utterly rejects the idea that grace is a license for moral collapse. In the biblical framework, true freedom is not the absence of boundaries. True freedom is the ability to live in alignment with reality, under the loving and just lordship of Christ.
That's a powerful distinction.
Furthermore, Jude is a devastating critique of modern leadership dynamics. He challenges communities that confuse charisma with authority and outrage with truth.
Confusing outrage with truth. If there's a phrase that defines the internet age, it is that one.
Without a doubt.
Whoever yells the loudest, whoever mocks traditional authority with the most clever sarcasm, gets the followers, the clicks, and the money.
Look at how Jude describes them in verse 16. These are grumblers, malcontents, following their own sinful desires. They are loud-mouthed boasters, showing favoritism to gain advantage.
Sound like a few social media influencers.
Exactly. They generate a lot of noise, but remember, they are waterless clouds. They promise a storm of change, but they deliver absolute barrenness. They leave the people who follow them dry and devastated.
It is a heavy, heavy warning. And honestly, reading through the first 23 verses of Jude can feel a bit exhausting. It is relentless warfare.
It doesn't let up.
But then, right at the very end, the letter takes a turn that is almost shocking in its beauty. I want to talk about the grand finale. After all the talk of wandering stars, fiery judgment, and stained garments, Jude ends on this transcendent note of peace.
The doxology, verses 24 and 25. It is widely considered one of the most magnificent doxologies in the entire New Testament.
Let me read it. Now to him who is able to keep you from stumbling and to present you blameless before the presence of his glory with great joy, to the only God, our Savior, through Jesus Christ our Lord, be glory, majesty, dominion, and authority before all time and now and forever. Amen.
It's beautiful.
Just washes over you. How does he make that pivot? How do you go from fighting for your life to singing a hymn of absolute triumph?
By synthesizing the entire journey of faith. Jude is a realist. He does not imagine a fictionless Christianity.
No, definitely not.
He assumes that false teaching, betrayal, and spiritual danger are just standard operating conditions in a fallen world. But his ultimate anchor is his Christology.
Explain that.
His focus is on who Jesus is. Jesus is the sovereign Lord, and God completes what he begins. Notice how the doxology circles all the way back to the opening of the letter.
To him who is able to keep you from stumbling.
It comes back to preservation. In the midst of the chaos, Jude lifts the eyes of his readers off of the false teachers, off of the threat of judgment, and fixes them squarely on the majesty of God.
So the crisis does not get the final word.
No. The intruders don't get the final word. The fear doesn't get the final word. God's preserving power does. And because of that, the act of contending for the faith, all that agonizing struggle we talked about, doesn't end in anxiety.
Right.
And it doesn't end in arrogance or self-congratulations over how well you defended the truth. It ends in worship.
What a phenomenal journey for such a short text. To quickly recap the ground we've covered today, we started with the reluctant author Jude, leaning on his connection to James, forced to pivot from a pleasant letter into a massive emergency intervention.
We looked at the insidious nature of the intruders, leaders who slipped in sideways, perverted the grace of God into an excuse for immorality, and operated like corrupt patrons feeding off the community.
We explored how Jude used the deep historical memory of his audience, the tragedy of the Exodus generation, the rebellion of the ancient angels, the destruction of Sodom, and the sins of Cain, Balaam, and Korah, to prove that spiritual privilege never erases moral accountability.
We ventured into the apocalyptic, looking at how Jude utilized ancient traditions like the Book of Enoch and the assumption of Moses to speak the cultural language of his day.
Showing how even the archangel Michael respected divine authority more than the arrogant false teachers did.
And we unpacked a profound tension between divine preservation and human perseverance, how we are kept by God so that we can actively keep ourselves in His love.
Which led us to the practical necessity of pastoral triage, extending mercy to the doubting, snatching others from the fire, and maintaining strict, holy boundaries when dealing with deep corruption.
All of it culminating in a doxology of absolute trust in the God who keeps us from falling. It is a masterclass in theological defense.
It truly is. It reminds us that defending the truth is not merely a sterile academic exercise. It is a deeply moral and spiritual way of life that requires fierce courage, extreme mercy, and an unshakable confidence in God's sovereignty.
Very well said.
And as we wrap up, we want to leave you, the listener, with a specific, provocative thought to mull over, drawn right from the historical precedents Jude laid out. Think back to the Israelites in the wilderness.
The Exodus generation.
Yes, they had the greatest redemption history in the ancient world right in their rearview mirror. They saw the plagues, they ate the Passover, they literally walked through the parted waters of the Red Sea. They had seen God move in ways no one else had ever witnessed.
That they still fell. They still faced judgment.
Why? Because they lacked present fidelity. Their past miracles, their historical pedigree could not save them from their present unbelief.
It's a powerful lesson.
So take a hard look at the world around you. Look at the institutions you trust, look at the leaders you follow, or even look at the trajectory of your own life today. Are we relying too much on the deliverances and the religious credentials of our past, while entirely neglecting the faithfulness, the humility, and the moral accountability required of us right now?
That is the enduring, searching question of Jude.
Something to think about.
Yeah.
Until next time.